Back when families raised their own chickens and nothing from the bird went to waste, chicken wasn't just dinner, it was dignity. These recipes were passed down quietly, from mothers in aprons to daughters with flour-dusted hands, each one carrying the wisdom of how to feed many with little. Today, I'm honoring those forgotten meals, the ones that brought families together, even when times were hard and cupboards were bare. Dish number 1, chicken a la king. There's something undeniably grand about the name, chicken a la king. It rolls off the tongue like a French opera, giving the impression of white gloves, polished silver, and chandelier-lit dining rooms. It sounds as if it should be served with a flourish, under a silver cloche, revealed with a puff of steam as a waiter bows slightly. But don't let the name fool you. Chicken a la king might dress up like royalty, but its soul is thoroughly down to earth. This dish didn't come from Versailles. It came from the can-do kitchens of American cooks who knew how to coax elegance from leftovers. From the turn of the 20th century through the 1950s, chicken a la king reigned supreme. It graced the menus of swanky hotels and sturdy school cafeterias alike. You could find it steaming gently on cruise ships or nestled in casseroles at Wednesday night church suppers. It was a dish that knew how to adapt, fitting in just as comfortably on a linen-draped table as it did on a scratched Formica countertop. By the time the 1950s rolled around, it had become a staple, particularly for busy homemakers who needed to turn one measly chicken into a meal fit for 6. Its origins? Still hotly debated, like any good piece of culinary folklore. Some credit the Brighton Beach Hotel in Brooklyn, where a chef named William Bill King is said to have first whipped it up. Others claim the Waldorf Astoria in New York or the Bellevue Stratford in Philadelphia. Regardless of where it started, the recipe gallivanted across the country faster than you could say cream sauce, becoming a weeknight wonder and party trick rolled into one. The base of chicken a la king is blessedly simple. Yesterday's roast chicken, diced into tender chunks, met a white sauce born of butter, flour, and milk. Stirred gently over a flame until the consistency was smooth and lush, something between gravy and velvet. It became the stage upon which all else performed. A splash of cream added luxury, a dash of salt, a whisper of pepper, a little nutmeg if you were feeling European. To this canvas, cooks added color and character, green bell peppers for crunch, pimentos for that mid-century pop of red, and mushrooms so soft they practically melted on your tongue. Some added a shot of sherry for sophistication. Others tossed in peas, mostly for looks. But how it was served? That was pure drama, over rice, over noodles, atop toast points. But the true pièce de résistance was puff pastry. Golden, flaky, buttery, the kind that cracked under your fork and made you feel like royalty. Chicken a la king wasn't just a meal. It was a little bit of magic, a reminder that even leftovers could wear a crown. Dish number 2, chicken pie with egg gravy. This isn't your average chicken pot pie. Chicken pie with egg gravy is one of those hearty, humble dishes that speaks in a low, comforting voice, like a favorite aunt with flour-dusted hands and a no-nonsense apron. It's not flashy, but it doesn't need to be. This is food with backbone and heart, built from scratch and steeped in old-time sensibility. A dish born not from extravagance, but from the simple desire to fill bellies and gather folks around a table. It has its roots in southern kitchens and Appalachian cook stoves, where chickens were raised out back and nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. The pie itself is deceptively simple. Tender, stewed chicken, pulled from the bone, mixed with just enough of its own rich broth to keep it moist, and tucked beneath, or inside, a thick homemade crust. This isn't the flaky, delicate crust of a patisserie tart. No, sir. This is a sturdy, biscuit-like dough, flour, lard or butter, salt, and water, rolled thick enough to stand its ground against a gravy flood. Speaking of gravy, let's talk about the crown jewel of this dish, the egg gravy. Now, if you've never had it, you might raise an eyebrow at the name. Eggs in gravy, but stay with me. This silky, ivory-colored sauce starts the old-fashioned way, with drippings from the chicken, maybe a bit of butter added in, a spoonful of flour whisked until it bubbles and browns, and then a slow pour of milk or broth to form the base. But then, just before serving, chopped hard-boiled eggs are folded in, little pockets of creaminess and protein that make the sauce somehow richer, more comforting, more complete. The flavor is mild, but deeply satisfying, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and maybe a touch of sage or onion if the cook felt fancy. The result is something that feels familiar even if you've never tasted it before. The kind of dish that tastes like it should be eaten in a kitchen with a screen door creaking in the background and a cat curled up on the windowsill. Chicken pie with egg gravy doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't shout. It's quiet, confident, and endlessly nostalgic. It tastes like Sunday dinners and hand-me-down recipes. And when that warm gravy seeps into the crust just so, catching in the flaky edges and clinging to the bits of chicken like it belongs there, well, suddenly you remember why dishes like this were never written down. They didn't need to be. They were remembered. Dish number 3, buttered chicken Maryland. Now here's a dish that sounds like it belongs on a silver-plated menu, nestled between Coquille Saint-Jacques and Chateaubriand. But buttered chicken Maryland wasn't born in Paris or plucked from the pages of haute cuisine. No, this curious, golden-hued comfort dish hails from much humbler, but no less storied territory, the eastern seaboard of the United States. It came of age in the hotel kitchens of the 1920s through the 1950s, when railroad dining cars still served meals on porcelain and steamship menus promised a little taste of luxury. Back then, chicken Maryland was synonymous with elegance, even if the recipe raised a few eyebrows, especially when it involved pan-fried bananas. Rooted in the mid-Atlantic tradition of pan-frying chicken, the original version probably did begin in Maryland, where cooks took pride in their technique. Crispy but not dry, rich but never greasy. But once the dish entered the world of white linen dining, it evolved. It was no longer just homey Sunday chicken. It became a dressed-up, butter-bathed, slightly exotic star of the plate. Somewhere along the way, a clever hotel chef decided to make it memorable, and thus the bananas entered the picture. The chicken itself was classic in preparation, but elevated in execution. Bone-in legs or thighs were dredged in seasoned flour, just salt, pepper, maybe a touch of paprika, and then fried gently in a generous pool of butter. Real butter, sometimes clarified to avoid scorching. The technique was slow and mindful. A lid covered the skillet halfway through, allowing the chicken to steam and fry at the same time. The result? Meat that stayed succulent and moist, protected by a crust that was golden, tender, and infused with the nutty, toasted flavor of browned butter. Then came the garnish. A ripe banana, sliced lengthwise and dusted lightly with sugar or cinnamon, or both, was quickly browned in the same butter, right beside where the chicken had cooked. The banana absorbed the butter's savory essence and caramelized just enough to become glossy and sweet, almost tropical. It was nestled alongside the chicken like a side of fried plantain's delicate cousin. To finish, a pour of creamy bechamel or pan gravy pulled it all together. The chicken soaked it up like a biscuit would, while the banana played foil, soft, sweet, a little mysterious. It was a dish that didn't apologize for being different. And in its heyday, it was beloved for exactly that. Today, buttered chicken Maryland might seem like a quirky antique of American cuisine, but bring it to your table once, just once, and you'll find yourself surprised by how well the flavors sing together. A dish that whispers of old trains, polished brass, and the charm of a forgotten era. Dish number 4, smothered chicken with onions and bacon. Now this is a dish that walks into your kitchen wearing boots, that is smelling like Sunday, and ready to feed your soul. Smothered chicken with onions and bacon isn't fancy food. It doesn't wear garnish or stand up straight on the plate. It slouches a little. It sighs. It bubbles gently in the pan like it's got nowhere else to be, and that's exactly the point. This is comfort food at its most genuine. Deep South in spirit, full of flavor, and built from ingredients you probably already have sitting in your pantry. At its heart, smothered chicken is about transformation. It takes a few simple things, chicken thighs or drumsticks, a handful of onions, some smoky bacon, and turns them into something tender, rich, and layered with meaning. This is the kind of dish that showed up on stoves when the weather turned cool and the garden was down to onions and maybe a few herbs. The kind you cooked in a big cast iron skillet, letting the aromas drift through the house like a welcome home banner. The recipe starts by browning your bacon, thick cut, smoky, and unapologetic. You let it sizzle until it's crisp but not brittle, then scoop it out and leave the fat behind. That's where your chicken goes next, seasoned just with salt, pepper, and maybe a little paprika or garlic powder if you're feeling generous. Skin-on, bone-in pieces are best. They bring flavor and stand up to the long, slow cook that follows. You brown the chicken in the bacon drippings until it takes on that rich, golden color that only happens when fat and patience hold hands. Now come the onions, sliced into thick rings so they don't disappear. They go right into the same pan, soaking up every drop of flavor left behind. You stir them gently, coaxing them into sweetness, and then return the chicken and bacon to the mix. Add a bit of broth, just enough to make a shallow pool, maybe a splash of cream or milk if you want things silkier. Then you cover it up and let the whole thing smother. Not boil, not bake, smother. Low heat, long time, no rushing. When it's ready, the chicken is falling off the bone tender, the onions are soft as memory, and the bacon has melted into little bursts of smoky, salty joy. The sauce is thick, more like a gravy, and it clings to everything it touches. Serve it over rice, mashed potatoes, or just with a hunk of crusty bread to catch the drippings. This isn't just supper, it's a hug on a plate, a history lesson in a skillet, and proof that the best meals don't need a spotlight, they just need a little time and a whole lot of love. Dish number 5, chicken mull. You don't just eat chicken mull, you gather around it. This dish isn't served on porcelain or plated with parsley. It's ladled from an enormous steam-rimmed pot into styrofoam bowls, handed off with a smile, and eaten under string lights, on folding chairs, at the kind of event where everybody brings something, even if it's just their appetite. Part soup, part stew, part edible folklore, chicken mull is a quiet icon of Carolina and Georgia Piedmont cooking. It was born in hard times, shaped by resourcefulness, and passed down not on recipe cards, but in memory and muscle. Picture the scene. A brisk autumn evening behind a church or beside a rural volunteer fire station. A propane burner holds court over a pot big enough to bathe a toddler in. Inside, a whole chicken, or sometimes several, simmers gently, scenting the cool air with the rich, unmistakable aroma of something good and honest. The bird is boiled until the meat practically slides off the bone, falling into shreds that melt into the broth. The skin, the marrow, even the bones themselves lend their strength to the stock, turning it from plain water into liquid gold. And then comes the signature move, one that makes outsiders blink: crushed saltine crackers. Not a few, but handfuls. Stirred in slowly, they dissolve and thicken the broth until it takes on the consistency of something between porridge and chowder. Not smooth, not chunky, just perfectly, comfortingly in between. This isn't a dish for showing off. It's a dish for making do, and somehow turning that into something unforgettable. Whole milk is poured in next, giving the mull a creamy richness and softening the flavor until it's almost sweet. If money was tight, evaporated milk stepped in, and no one complained. A stick of butter melts into the pot, adding body and a quiet luxury, while salt and pepper do their dependable work. Sometimes there's a splash of hot sauce, just enough to wake up your sinuses, but never too much. Chicken mull is a gentle thing. No carrots, no celery, no herbs, no pretense. Just chicken, crackers, milk, butter, and thyme. You won't find it in cookbooks or bistros. You'll find it at firehouse fundraisers, at family reunions, or in backyards where someone's uncle has been tending the pot since noon. You'll eat it with a plastic spoon, standing near the propane flame for warmth, maybe while a child runs past dragging a balloon on a string. Chicken mull isn't meant to impress, it's meant to comfort. It's not fancy, it's not photogenic, but it's enough. And for those who know it, that's everything. Dish number 6, chicken and rice a la creole. Chicken and rice a la creole doesn't sneak quietly into your kitchen. It struts in, hips swinging, perfume of peppers and garlic trailing behind like a jazz band marching down Bourbon Street. This isn't subtle food. It's bold, vibrant, and joyfully messy. The kind of dish that tells you to loosen your belt, pour another glass of sweet tea or wine, and sit a while. It's a dish that speaks many languages: French finesse, African depth, Spanish heat, and Southern generosity. Yet somehow it sings in perfect harmony, all in the voice of New Orleans. Long before gumbo was crowned the king of the Crescent City, chicken a la creole was the backbone of many a home kitchen. You'd find it simmering on wood stoves, bubbling in cast iron, being passed down with a knowing nod and no real measurements. It wasn't fancy, but it had heart. And it didn't take much, just a few honest ingredients and the patience to let them tell their story. The recipe begins, as so many Louisiana dishes do, with the Holy Trinity: onions, celery, and green bell peppers, chopped fine and tossed into a pot of hot bacon fat or butter. The aroma that floats up as these soften is the smell of possibility, sweet, vegetal, and savory all at once. Into that base goes minced garlic, just enough to nudge things into bolder territory. Then come the tomatoes, fresh in summer, canned the rest of the year, crushed and simmered until they surrender to the pot, turning everything a lush, saucy red. Seasoned bone-in chicken, usually thighs or drumsticks, sometimes whatever was cheapest that week, gets nestled into this bubbling bath. It simmers low and slow, soaking up all those layers of flavor. Depending on the cook, you might see a dash of hot sauce, a spoonful of brown sugar, maybe a bit of Worcestershire. A bay leaf adds depth. A sprig of thyme might find its way in, if someone remembered to pick it from the windowsill. When the chicken is fall-apart tender, it's shredded and stirred back into the sauce. Then in goes the rice, already cooked, light and fluffy, stirred through the pot until every grain is kissed with tomato and spice. What you're left with is more than just a meal. It's a party in a pot. It's a dish meant for gathering, for loud talk and second helpings. Served with warm cornbread, maybe a pickle or two, chicken and rice a la creole is a dish that lingers on your tongue, in your memory, and in your heart. Because in New Orleans, even comfort food knows how to dance. Dish number 7, coq au vin with pearl onions. Coq au vin may sound like something you'd order beneath a chandelier, with a waiter in a tux and a wine list heavier than the menu, but don't let the fancy name fool you. This dish wasn't born in a 5-star kitchen. It was born in the French countryside, in the kind of farmhouse where chickens pecked in the yard and every meal had to earn its keep. Coq au vin means, quite simply, rooster in wine. And originally, that's exactly what it was. A thrifty, rustic solution to a tough old bird that had stopped laying and started crowing a little too loudly. It was a matter of survival and skill. Farmers didn't waste food, and they certainly didn't waste a whole rooster just because he was no longer tender. Instead, they braised him low and slow in red wine, usually a hearty Burgundy or whatever the vineyard had plenty of. They added herbs, onions, and a little cured pork for richness, and let time do the work. The result was a dish that transformed something stringy and stubborn into something deeply flavorful and tender enough to fall apart with a fork. By the time this humble recipe crossed the Atlantic and landed in mid-century America, it had shed its rooster roots in favor of grocery store chicken, thighs and drumsticks, bone in, skin on, and perfect for soaking up flavor. It became the kind of dish you served at dinner parties to show you were cultured, sophisticated, maybe even a little European. And yet, the spirit of the dish never changed. It still starts with bacon, thick cut and smoky, cooked until crisp in a heavy Dutch oven. Then you brown the chicken in that same flavorful fat, building up a layer of fond at the bottom of the pan. In go the aromatics: pearl onions, garlic, earthy mushrooms, and maybe a chopped carrot or two. Everything sizzles and softens before the wine takes center stage. A whole bottle, poured in slowly like a toast to tradition. With a bay leaf, a few sprigs of thyme, and a ladle of chicken stock, the pot is brought to a low simmer and covered, left alone to bubble gently for an hour or more. During that time, the wine reduces to a glossy, burgundy-hued sauce, the meat tenderizes, and the whole house begins to smell like patience and old-world comfort. Served with mashed potatoes, buttered noodles, or a wedge of crusty bread to sop up the sauce, coq au vin isn't just a meal, it's a tribute. A reminder that food can be both practical and poetic, that old birds still have something to offer, and that a slow-cooked supper is worth every minute you give it. Dish number 8, chicken divan. If ever a casserole wore pearls and heels, it would be chicken divan. Rich, creamy, and ever so slightly theatrical, this dish reigned supreme on mid-century dining tables where cardigans were freshly pressed, the coffee was percolating, and the ladies of the bridge club came hungry for both gossip and a second helping. With a name that sounds like it should come with a maitre d', chicken divan was the casserole that said you had both good taste and a well-stocked pantry. But don't let the French-sounding name fool you. This dish didn't come from the bistros of Paris. It came from Manhattan. Specifically, the Divan Parisian restaurant in the Chatham Hotel, an upscale eatery that, in the 1930s, unveiled this now iconic chicken and broccoli bake as its signature dish. Originally, it was a more refined affair: gently poached chicken breast, lightly steamed broccoli spears, and a velvety bechamel or mornay sauce, served with linen napkins and tableside service. Once it hit American home kitchens, though, the recipe rolled up its sleeves and settled in for the long haul. By the 1950s and 60s, Chicken Divan had traded its silver service for a trusty Pyrex dish and made itself comfortable in every spiral-bound church cookbook and community fundraiser flyer. It had officially entered the golden age of casseroles. The home cook's version started simply. Leftover roast chicken or poached breasts were cut into hearty chunks, enough to let you know this was no side dish. Broccoli, usually frozen or freshly blanched, made up the green bed beneath. The sauce, once a classical French affair, was reimagined using pantry staples: condensed cream of chicken or mushroom soup, a spoonful of mayonnaise or sour cream, a splash of lemon juice for brightness, and sharp cheddar for richness. A few brave cooks added a whisper of curry powder or a splash of white wine, but the core flavors were creamy, savory, and utterly comforting. The assembled dish was crowned with something crunchy, often buttered breadcrumbs or crushed Ritz crackers, then baked until bubbling and golden at the edges. When you pulled it from the oven, it smelled like warmth, like hospitality, like the kind of meal that could stretch to feed an unexpected guest or comfort a friend who just had a long day. Chicken Divan was more than just a casserole. It was an announcement. You had style, you had organization, and you knew how to turn leftovers into something a little fancy. Today, it's mostly a memory, tucked away in retro cookbooks and the back pages of old recipe cards. But dust it off, bake it up, and serve it with a knowing smile, and you'll taste why Chicken Divan once ruled the dinner table with quiet elegance. Dish number 9, chicken paprikosh. Chicken paprikosh doesn't shout. It doesn't sizzle or smoke or try to impress you with a garnish. It simply waits, quiet and confident, in a pot of brick red sauce, steam curling up like a memory you almost forgot. This dish doesn't belong to fine dining or trendy cookbooks. It belongs to kitchens with linoleum floors and lace curtains. It belongs to family tables where elbows are allowed, where stories are passed along with the salt shaker. Chicken paprikosh is history you can taste. The dish hails from Hungary, where paprika isn't just a spice, it's a way of life. Generations of cooks built their flavor profiles around it, using sweet, smoky, or hot varieties to color and season everything from soups to sausages. When Hungarian immigrants came to the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they didn't bring much, but they brought their food. And chicken paprikosh made itself right at home in places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, where the weather could be just as harsh as back in the old country, and a warm, hearty meal meant everything. The process is simple, which is part of its genius. You begin with chicken, dark meat, bone-in, because it's more forgiving and full of flavor. These are browned in a deep skillet or Dutch oven, often alongside a heap of thinly sliced onions. The onions cook down into something soft and golden, barely recognizable by the time the dish is done, but absolutely essential to its soul. Then the paprika, real Hungarian sweet paprika, rich in color and aroma, is added generously. It stains the onions and oils a deep crimson and releases a fragrance so warm, so grounding, it almost feels like a lullaby. A splash of broth and maybe a spoonful of tomato paste follow, just enough to keep things simmering gently. As the chicken cooks low and slow, the broth thickens and deepens in color. When the meat is tender and nearly falling off the bone, the pot comes off the heat. That's when the magic happens. A few big dollops of sour cream are stirred in, turning the sauce silky and velvety, mellowing the paprika into something richer and rounder. Traditionally, it's served over egg noodles or dumplings, something to carry the sauce and cradle the chicken. But honestly, you could spoon it over bread, mashed potatoes, or even eat it straight from the pot, and it would still feel like home. Chicken paprikosh doesn't chase trends. It holds fast. It's food that remembers, and food that helps you remember, to take your time, to stir with care, and to eat with both hands and heart. Dish number 10, chicken and chestnut dressing. Before the days of boxed stuffing and freeze-dried flavor packets, there was chicken and chestnut dressing, a dish that didn't just taste like autumn, it was autumn. It was a casserole layered with memory, tradition, and the unmistakable richness of roasted chestnuts. Long before chestnuts were confined to a single Christmas carol, they were gathered from the forests of the Appalachian South, fat, glossy, and as precious as pecans. In places like Tennessee and the hills of North Carolina, where chestnut trees once blanketed the ridges before the blight came through, this dish was both a celebration and a preservation of seasonal bounty. This wasn't something whipped up on a whim. Chicken and chestnut dressing took time, care, and planning. It began, as so many good Southern dishes do, with cornbread. Baked a day or two ahead and left out to dry slightly, the cornbread was crumbled into large bowls, sometimes alongside a handful of stale biscuits or white bread scraps if you needed to stretch it. The texture mattered. Not too fine, not too chunky. It needed to soak up flavor without turning to mush. Next came the vegetables, celery and onion, always finely chopped and cooked low and slow in chicken fat or butter until they were soft, fragrant, and just beginning to caramelize. These were folded gently into the crumbled cornbread, followed by the chestnuts, roasted over an open flame or baked in a hot oven, then peeled and chopped by hand. Chestnuts gave the dish a distinctive richness, almost nutty and sweet, and a satisfying bite that made the whole thing feel more special than everyday stuffing. Then came the chicken, typically from a whole bird that had been boiled with herbs, then pulled apart tender and steaming. The shredded meat was mixed right into the dressing, turning it from a side dish into the main course. A spoonful or two of the broth might be added to moisten the mix, along with fresh or dried sage, a bit of black pepper, and sometimes a beaten egg to help bind everything together. It baked in a cast iron skillet or deep casserole dish until the top turned golden and crisp at the edges, while the inside stayed tender and savory. The scent that filled the kitchen was unmistakable. Thanksgiving, even if it was only Tuesday. Served with stewed okra, green beans, or maybe just a spoon and a quiet moment, chicken and chestnut dressing reminds us that the best dishes don't come from a box. They come from the woods, the garden, the hearth. From a time when ingredients had stories, and supper was something you waited for, not microwaved. Dish number 11, garlic chicken with vermicelli. This dish doesn't announce itself with fanfare or fuss. It doesn't come draped in cheese or garnished with sprigs of herbs. Garlic chicken with vermicelli is the quiet kind of cooking, the kind passed down in spiral-bound cookbooks with pages smudged from years of use. It's food born from memory, from necessity, from homes where the kitchen was always warm and the best seasoning was thyme. You didn't make it for a crowd. You made it because someone was tired, or cold, or just needed something honest in their bowl. There's nothing complicated here. No measuring cups, no timers, just a whole chicken, onions, salt, and garlic. A lot of garlic. A whole head, maybe two, smashed open and tossed into the pot without ceremony. Some cooks didn't even bother peeling the cloves. The skins added depth to the broth, and the garlic mellowed as it simmered, losing its bite and taking on a sweetness that filled the whole house with comfort. The chicken boiled slowly, over the kind of heat that hums rather than hisses. After an hour or two, it was tender enough to fall apart at a glance. It came out of the pot, was left to cool, and then pulled apart with bare hands, because that's how you got every last bit. The garlic could be strained out, but more often than not, it was mashed back into the broth with a spoon or the back of a ladle, turning the liquid into something silky, golden, and so fragrant it could bring a neighbor to your door. Then came the vermicelli, thin, delicate strands of pasta, broken by hand into manageable bits. They were dropped right into the broth, where they drank up the flavor like dry earth drinks up rain. A pinch of pepper, maybe a pat of lard, or a knob of butter went in, just enough to round things out. Some cooks swore by a dash of parsley or a drop of lemon juice. Most didn't bother. This dish was about simplicity. Once the noodles were tender, the chicken was stirred back in. No fancy layering, no separate sauces. Just meat and broth and pasta, brought together in a way that felt like home, served in deep bowls, maybe with white bread on the side to sop up what the spoon missed. Garlic chicken with vermicelli didn't try to be anything but what it was, deeply satisfying. It was born in kitchens that made something from nothing. Where garlic was medicine, noodles were comfort, and chicken, well, that was love, boiled down to its very essence and stirred right back in. Dish number 12, milk fried chicken. There's fried chicken, and then there's milk fried chicken. Not loud and crackling, but tender, golden, and whisper crisp, the kind that lets out a sigh beneath its crust when you bite in, like it's been waiting all day to feed you. This isn't the fried chicken of fast food counters or trendy gastropubs. It's older than that. Simpler. Born in the warmth of farm kitchens and the hush of Sunday afternoons, back when chickens came from the yard and milk came from the cow out back. Milk fried chicken has its roots in the rural South and the forgotten recipes of boarding houses, where meals were hearty, careful, and built on what was already in the pantry. The technique was passed quietly from mother to daughter, or whispered across the table at quilting bees and canning circles. It was never about flash. It was about feeling. And no written recipe ever captured the smell of it frying in an old cast-iron skillet, the kind blackened with years of good meals. You began with the chicken, always bone-in, legs, thighs, maybe the breast if it was big enough to feed a few. It was soaked in milk, not buttermilk, not cream, milk. Whole, raw, fresh, if possible, poured over the pieces and left to sit in a bowl on the counter or tucked in the icebox. An overnight soak was best, but even an hour gave the chicken a softness, a subtle sweetness that only milk could bring. The milk clung to the meat, tenderizing it just enough without overwhelming the flavor. Then came the dredge, just plain flour, salt, and black pepper, maybe a whisper of baking powder or a pinch of cayenne if you were feeling bold. The chicken was lifted from the milk, no rinsing, still dripping, and laid into the flour one piece at a time. You didn't rush it. You pressed the flour in like you meant it, like you were sealing in something worth saving. It went into hot lard or bacon grease, never just oil, and the skillet, cast iron, no question. The chicken sizzled gently, not furiously, and the lid went on for a while to trap steam and make the meat impossibly tender. Then off came the lid to finish crisping the crust, which turned the color of harvest wheat and flaked like pie crust under your fork. Served alongside sliced garden tomatoes or a scoop of creamed corn, milk-fried chicken didn't ask for applause. It offered comfort, quiet, generous, and unforgettable. And if you cook it today, just once, you'll understand why it was never written down. Because some things, like love and lard, are best passed hand to hand. Dish number 13, chicken and cabbage boil. There's fried chicken, and then there's milk-fried chicken. Not loud and crackling, but tender, golden, and whisper crisp. The kind that lets out a sigh beneath its crust when you bite in, like it's been waiting all day to feed you. This isn't the fried chicken of fast food counters or trendy gastropubs. It's older than that, simpler. Born in the warmth of farm kitchens and the hush of Sunday afternoons, back when chickens came from the yard and milk came from the cow out back, milk-fried chicken has its roots in the rural South and the forgotten recipes of boarding houses, where meals were hearty, careful, and built on what was already in the pantry. The technique was passed quietly from mother to daughter, or whispered across the table at quilting bees and canning circles. It was never about flash. It was about feeling. And no written recipe ever captured the smell of it frying in an old cast-iron skillet, the kind blackened with years of good meals. You began with the chicken, always bone-in. Legs, thighs, maybe the breast, if it was big enough to feed a few. It was soaked in milk, not buttermilk, not cream, milk. Whole, raw, fresh, if possible, poured over the pieces and left to sit in a bowl on the counter or tucked in the icebox. An overnight soak was best, but even an hour gave the chicken a softness, a subtle sweetness that only milk could bring. The milk clung to the meat, tenderizing it just enough without overwhelming the flavor. Then came the dredge, just plain flour, salt, and black pepper. Maybe a whisper of baking powder or a pinch of cayenne if you were feeling bold. The chicken was lifted from the milk, no rinsing, still dripping, and laid into the flour one piece at a time. You didn't rush it. You pressed the flour in like you meant it, like you were sealing in something worth saving. It went into hot lard or bacon grease, never just oil. And the skillet, cast iron, no question. The chicken sizzled gently, not furiously, and the lid went on for a while to trap steam and make the meat impossibly tender. Then off came the lid to finish crisping the crust, which turned the color of harvest wheat and flaked like pie crust under your fork. Served alongside sliced garden tomatoes or a scoop of creamed corn, milk-fried chicken didn't ask for applause. It offered comfort, quiet, generous, and unforgettable. And if you cook it today, just once, you'll understand why it was never written down. Because some things, like love and lard, are best passed hand to hand. Dish number 14. Curried chicken salad with chutney. If you were a lady of leisure, or simply trying to host like one, in the cocktail-poured afternoons of the 1950s and 60s, curried chicken salad with chutney was your secret weapon. It was the star of the bridge table, the elegant centerpiece of a garden luncheon, and the kind of recipe that felt just exotic enough to raise an eyebrow, but still used ingredients you could find at the A&P. This wasn't your grandmother's plain chicken salad drowned in mayo and sprinkled with a sad handful of celery. No, this was chicken salad with ambition. It was clipped from the pages of Good Housekeeping or Better Homes and Gardens, scribbled on index cards in tidy cursive, and passed around like insider knowledge at Tupperware parties and ladies' luncheons. You made it when the PTA president was coming over, or when you wanted to prove you could host with flair, even on a Tuesday afternoon. The base was simple but particular: poached chicken breast, cooled and cubed, not shredded. This wasn't rustic, it was refined. Celery brought the crunch, scallions added a whisper of bite, and depending on who taught you the recipe, maybe a scattering of red grapes or a diced apple for sweetness and color. But what made this dish sing was the dressing. Mayonnaise, of course, was the canvas, rich, smooth, familiar. Into it went a generous spoonful of curry powder, the kind that came in a small tin from the international shelf of the grocery store. It wasn't fiery, but it brought warmth, fragrance, and a little mystery. Then came the chutney, usually the famous Major Gray's mango chutney, spooned in straight from the jar, thick and golden, sweet and tangy, like edible sunshine. That combination of curry and chutney transformed the chicken salad into something utterly unexpected, layered, lightly spiced, and strangely refreshing. Some cooks tossed in slivered almonds for crunch, or a handful of golden raisins if they were feeling bold. A dash of lemon juice, a pinch of salt. It was a salad made to be tinkered with. Served cold in butter lettuce cups, or piled high on split croissants, or pressed into neat tea sandwiches with the crusts cut off. It was chic without trying too hard. For a while, it reigned as the queen of the cold lunch. Then ranch dressing arrived, buffalo sauce took over, and the golden era of curried chicken salad quietly slipped away. But make it today, just once, and you'll be transported. Back to a kitchen with pink countertops and formica floors. Back to a time when a jar of chutney and a dash of curry could turn chicken into something worthy of polite applause and second helpings. Dish number 15, chicken noodle ring. If you've never eaten your supper in the shape of a crown, then friend, you're about to discover the showstopper of the 1960s, the chicken noodle ring. More than just a meal, this dish was a performance. It wasn't scooped or spooned. It was unveiled, flipped out of a gleaming bundt pan with the drama of a birthday cake and the pride of a home cook who had just conquered the culinary mountaintop. It was casserole meets sculpture, dinner meets centerpiece. Born in the golden age of gelatin molds, mid-century glamour, and anything with surprise in the title, the chicken noodle ring took the idea of comfort food and gave it a twist, literally. American homemakers, always eager to impress with their Pyrex prowess, fell in love with this ring-shaped wonder because it offered everything: flavor, flair, and the kind of visual appeal that made husbands raise an eyebrow and say, well, now that's something. At its heart, it was a cozy, creamy noodle bake, just dressed up for the party. Egg noodles formed the base, cooked until just tender and ready to cradle a mixture of shredded cooked chicken, cream of mushroom, or cream of celery soup, a beaten egg or two for structure, and a hearty handful of shredded cheddar cheese. To that, you'd add salt, pepper, a dash of paprika, maybe a dollop of sour cream for that signature richness. And no chicken noodle ring was complete without a sprinkling of diced pimentos, those ruby red flecks that shouted, "Look at me," from every slice. The key to success: greasing the mold within an inch of its life. Whether you used a classic ring mold or your prettiest bundt pan, it had to be slick enough for the whole thing to slide out in one perfect, steaming, golden-edged piece. Once baked, it was turned out onto a platter, usually with a flourish and a breath held in hope. And what went in the center? That was the fun part. Some cooks nestled in creamed spinach, others piled in extra chicken and gravy. A few went with buttered peas or even a little fruit salad for a pop of sweetness. However it was filled, it made the kind of presentation you just don't see at the dinner table anymore. The chicken noodle ring eventually went out of style, along with tomato aspic and molded shrimp salad. But it deserves another moment in the spotlight. Because sometimes, dinner should be more than just good. It should be memorable. And nothing says, "I tried," like a casserole that can stand up on its own. Dish number 16, chicken livers with sherry. Now this dish has grit and grace in equal measure. Chicken livers with sherry is not for the faint of heart. It never was. It's a dish with confidence, full of deep, earthy flavor, rich texture, and just enough refinement to raise an eyebrow. This isn't food that plays coy. It knows exactly what it is: bold, nourishing, and worthy of every bite. It came from a time when home cooks made miracles with what others overlooked, and made them delicious enough to serve with pride. Back in the wartime years and well into the 1950s, chicken livers were a kitchen staple. They were affordable, nutrient-dense, and widely available, tucked inside the cavity of every whole chicken. Housewives and boarding house cooks knew better than to toss them aside. When handled with care and cooked with a little imagination, chicken livers could hold their own against any roast or stew. And when paired with a splash of sherry and a heavy, well-seasoned skillet, they transformed into something far greater than the sum of their humble parts. It started with the freshest chicken livers you could get, rinsed under cool water and trimmed of any sinew or tough bits. The cast iron skillet was heated until it shimmered, then in went the butter, sometimes shared with a spoonful of bacon drippings for added depth. Thinly sliced onions were sautéed first, cooked down until golden, sweet, and just starting to stick to the pan. This wasn't just flavor, it was foundation. The livers were added gently, not overcrowded, and left to sear. No poking, no prodding. This dish demanded patience. Turn them once, just once, until both sides were browned, but the inside stayed tender, even a little pink. Then came the moment of alchemy, a modest splash of dry sherry, poured in to deglaze the pan. It bubbled and hissed, lifting every bit of flavor from the bottom and cloaking the livers in a velvety, nutty perfume. Seasoned simply with salt and black pepper, maybe a pinch of thyme or sage from the garden, the whole thing came together in under 20 minutes. Served hot over crusty toast, mashed potatoes, or white rice. The result was rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. A green salad, a sharp pickle, or a dollop of mustard on the side helped cut through the lushness. These days, chicken livers are often forgotten, passed over in favor of cleaner cuts. But once upon a time, they were honored with a splash of sherry and a seat at the head of the table. They didn't whisper luxury, they declared it boldly from a cast iron skillet. Dish number 17, fried chicken gizzards with cornmeal crust. If you've never had a gizzard, don't fret, you're in good company. But once upon a time, fried chicken gizzards with cornmeal crust were a southern staple, served without apology in school lunchrooms, roadside diners, and backyard fry shacks where everything hit the grease except the lemonade. Gizzards weren't seen as scraps, they were simply part of the bird. You used every piece, especially in the kind of kitchens where food had to stretch and waste wasn't just frowned upon, it was unheard of. In Appalachian homes, rural southern farms, and little town lunch counters with one spinning stool and a menu board written in chalk, gizzards had a rightful place beside the fried drumsticks and biscuits. Chewy, yes, but in the good way. Cooked right, they were tender with a satisfying bite and a deep, meaty flavor that made white meat seem downright boring. They were a working-class delicacy, fried golden and eaten with fingers, no silverware required. It started with the boil. Gizzards, often sold in big plastic tubs at the butcher or pulled from the bird itself, were rinsed clean and simmered in salted water until tender. A bay leaf, maybe some chopped onion, a few cloves of garlic for depth. They simmered for a good 45 minutes to an hour, until they softened just enough to lose their toughness, but kept the integrity of their bite. This step couldn't be skipped. A fried gizzard that hadn't been pre-cooked was a jaw workout, and not in a good way. Once tender and cooled, they were tossed in a simple dredge. Cornmeal was the key, fine or medium grind, mixed with a little all-purpose flour, salt, black pepper, and sometimes a flicker of cayenne. The cornmeal gave them a crust like no other, crisp, craggy, and golden, with a texture that clung tight even after a dunk in hot oil. They were pan-fried in a heavy skillet, usually cast iron, with just enough oil to shallow fry. Not submerged, just sizzled. Turned once or twice until they were perfectly crisp, they came out of the pan crackling and fragrant, ready to be dusted with more salt or hit with a splash of hot sauce or malt vinegar, depending on family tradition. Served in brown paper sacks or on chipped enamelware, fried gizzards were more than a snack. They were a ritual, something to chew on slow, to dip and share and remember. These days, they're often overlooked or passed up at the butcher counter, but bring them back just once, fry them up right, and you'll see why they were, and still are, some of the best bites on the bird. Dish number 18, garlic braised chicken and apples. Before savory came bottled in bouillon cubes and sweet mint syrupy, there were meals like garlic braised chicken and apples, earthy, subtle, and built from the kind of pantry a home cook once had to earn. This was the flavor of old America, Orchard fruit kissed by fire, garlic mellowed by time, and chicken, humble, hearty, and always on hand. It's the kind of dish you can picture bubbling away in a blackened iron pot, hanging over a hearth in colonial Virginia, perfuming the room with something both familiar and a little unexpected. At first glance, garlic and apples might seem like an odd couple, too sharp and too sweet to make peace. But old-world kitchens didn't deal in excess or endless spice racks. They dealt in resourcefulness, in seasonality. Apples came in bushels when the leaves turned gold, and chickens, well, they were always around. It only made sense to pair what was plentiful. And in the hands of a patient cook, this pairing becomes pure magic. You start with chicken thighs, bone in, skin on, the kind that can take heat and hold flavor. They go into a hot skillet with a spoonful of butter or lard, skin side down, until they sizzle and brown to the color of oak bark. Then, out they come for a moment's rest. Into that same fragrant fat go the garlic cloves. Not minced, not smashed, whole. Peeled or not, it's up to you. The heat coaxes the garlic out of its sharp shell, softening it into something caramel-like and savory. That's when the apples go in. Firm ones are best. Granny Smith, wine sap, or anything that keeps its shape and has a tart edge. Sliced into wedges, they brown lightly in the garlicky pan, releasing juice and drawing in every bit of flavor. Then the chicken returns, tucked into the apples like an old friend at the table. You add a splash of broth or white wine, a sprig of thyme or sage, and maybe a glug of cider vinegar to cut through the richness. Lid on, heat low, and the whole thing braises until the meat is tender and the apples are somewhere between fruit and sauce, soaking up every ounce of chicken drippings and softened garlic. When it's done, it doesn't need dressing up. Just serve it straight from the pan over mashed potatoes, buttered noodles, or crusty bread to catch the juices. It's not flashy food, it's soul food, colonial style. And though few people make it today, garlic braised chicken and apples deserves a spot at the table again. It may be quiet on the plate, but once it hits the tongue, it sings like a hymn from long ago. Dish number 19, chicken bread pudding. Now, you might raise an eyebrow at this one, bread pudding but savory with chicken, but give it a moment. Let it settle in your mind like day-old bread in a milk soak, and you'll start to see the sense in it. Chicken bread pudding was a masterpiece of Depression-era thrift, born from nothing more than scraps and good instincts. It took yesterday's bread and a few handfuls of leftover meat and turned them into something warm, filling, and so deeply satisfying you'll wonder why it ever disappeared from church cookbooks and Wednesday night suppers. The idea was simple, even if the flavors ran deep. It borrowed the technique of dessert bread pudding, the kind spiced with cinnamon and studded with raisins, but flipped it on its head. Sugar was swapped for salt, raisins for onions, and nutmeg for sage. It was dinner disguised as comfort food, like casserole in custard's clothing. The base was bread, always a mix of what you had. Day-old sandwich slices, crumbled cornbread, torn biscuits, never wasted, always saved. These were torn by hand and soaked in a mixture of beaten eggs and milk, often evaporated milk from a tin if fresh was scarce. The texture was key, soft but not mushy, like a sponge with just enough give. This wasn't just filler, it was the heart of the dish. Then came the chicken, usually shredded leftovers from Sunday's roast, pulled clean from the bone and stirred gently into the soaked bread. Next, a pan of chopped onions and celery sautéed in butter or bacon drippings was added for flavor and crunch. If you had it, a little sharp cheddar brought richness. If you didn't, no one complained. Seasoning was generous but simple. Salt and black pepper, always, and poultry seasoning or rubbed sage, often. Some cooks liked to add a spoonful of prepared mustard, a pinch of thyme, or even a dash of hot sauce to liven things up. Whatever you had, you used. Whatever you didn't, you worked around. The mixture was poured into a greased casserole dish and baked until the edges turned golden and crisp, and the center was just set. The result? A savory bread pudding with a custardy texture inside and a toasty crust on top. It smelled like home, like old kitchens and warm aprons, like dinner made with care, not cost. Spoon it out, serve it hot, and you'll understand what made this dish a quiet staple in so many humble homes. Today, it may be forgotten, but bring it back once and you'll never want to let it go. It's not flashy, it's just good. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Dish number 20, chicken corn soup with rivels. If you've never had a rivel, don't worry, you're in good company. Most folks outside Pennsylvania Dutch country simply called them dumplings, or maybe thought they were some kind of rustic noodle. But a rivel isn't either of those exactly. It's its own humble creation, crumbly, hand-pinched bits of flour and egg dough that, when dropped into hot broth, swell and soften into the heart of one of the most comforting dishes to ever grace a farmhouse table. Chicken corn soup with rivels. This isn't a dish made to impress. It's not delicate. It's not fancy. It doesn't arrive at the table wearing garnish or flair. It's made to nourish, to warm cold hands, to fill bellies after a day in the fields or a long walk home from church. It's food meant to carry people through the seasons, especially those long Pennsylvania winters when corn from the summer garden has been packed away and the soup pot becomes the center of the kitchen. You start, as so many good soups do, with a whole chicken, boiled gently in water with onion, salt, and pepper until the broth runs deep and golden and the house smells like safety. Once the chicken is tender, you pull it from the pot, let it cool, and shred the meat with your fingers. It's simple work, but it brings you close to the food, and that's part of the point. While the broth continues to simmer, you add corn, fresh if it's summer, cut straight off the cob and milked for extra sweetness. But more often than not, it's corn from the freezer, saved from July's bounty, and poured in by the handful. It's sweet and starchy, and wakes up the broth with golden specks. Then come the revels. No machines here, no rolling or slicing. Just flour, an egg, and your fingers. You mix until the dough holds together in little pebbles, about the size of a kernel of corn, and drop them, one by one, into the bubbling pot. They thicken the soup and give it body, floating like soft little dumplings that melt on your tongue. The chicken goes back in, maybe a sprig of parsley for color if you're feeling decorative. But that's it. You don't need much else. The soup speaks for itself. Ladled into wide bowls and served with white bread or a thick wedge of soda bread, chicken corn soup with rivels is a quiet dish, one that doesn't need applause. It just needs to be eaten, slowly, gratefully, and preferably with someone who remembers how their grandmother used to make it. Dish number 21, buttermilk baked chicken. Back when ovens were new enough to brag about and every kitchen had a tin of Crisco on the counter, buttermilk baked chicken was a sensation. It came from the golden age of casserole cards, apron strings, and potlucks, where Tupperware lids popped open to applause. This dish was the answer to a question every mid-century cook asked. How do I get the crunch of fried chicken without standing over a grease-spitting skillet for half an hour? The answer? Buttermilk and cornflakes. You started with chicken, usually thighs and drumsticks, because they stayed juicier in the oven. The trick was the soak. The chicken sat in a bath of tangy buttermilk, sometimes overnight, sometimes just an hour. The acid tenderized the meat and gave it that trademark tang you didn't even know you loved until it was gone. Then came the coating. Not breadcrumbs, too plain. Not flour, too dusty. No, this called for crushed cornflakes, the kind that came in the big yellow box and crunched under a rolling pin like fall leaves under boots. Mixed with salt, pepper, and a little paprika for color, they turned plain old chicken into a golden-crusted miracle. Each piece was dredged lovingly, packed into a buttered baking dish, and baked until the coating turned crisp and the buttermilk worked its magic inside. Sometimes, a bit of melted butter was drizzled over the top to help things along. Some cooks added garlic powder or a shake of dried herbs. Most just kept it simple. The smell filled the kitchen with that unmistakable scent of something good in the oven. It was less fussy than fried chicken, but just as satisfying, served hot, with green beans or scalloped potatoes, and usually a wedge of iceberg lettuce with Thousand Island dressing. This was weeknight food, but it felt like Sunday. It was dependable, adaptable, and delightfully crunchy. And the best part? You didn't have to clean grease off the stovetop. Buttermilk baked chicken was a star in the 1950s, and for good reason. Bake it once, and you'll remember why. It's proof that comfort doesn't need a deep fryer, just a hot oven, a box of cornflakes, and a little faith in simplicity. Dish number 22, chicken with sour cream and chives. In the 1970s, dinner didn't have to shout, it just had to soothe. And nothing said, "I care," quite like chicken with sour cream and chives. It wasn't a flashy meal, no flambe, no exotic spices, no colors that demanded attention. But it had something better, a quiet richness, a mellow flavor, and the kind of soft elegance that made people lean in a little closer to their plates. This was the dish of soft jazz playing in the background, candlelight glinting off glass casserole lids, and avocado green ovens working overtime. Chicken with sour cream and chives was born from a time when recipes came printed on index cards tucked behind ceramic chicken-shaped holders on the counter. It was the kind of dish passed between friends at baby showers, scribbled down at PTA meetings, or read aloud over the phone to a neighbor who needed something a little nice, but not too much. The chicken itself was straightforward, boneless breasts or thighs, pounded to an even thickness and laid neatly in a buttered baking dish. Seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and perhaps a whisper of garlic powder or onion salt, the chicken wasn't asked to carry the meal. The real star was the sauce. Sour cream gave it body and tang. A splash of chicken broth or a trickle of dry white wine added a gentle depth. And then came the chives, a whole bunch of them, finely chopped until the kitchen smelled like spring. Their sharp, oniony brightness cut through the richness of the cream like a well-timed compliment. Some cooks added cream cheese to make it extra lush, or a dollop of mayonnaise to stabilize the sauce and keep it from breaking. A spoonful of flour or cornstarch was whisked in by those who wanted their sauce to cling rather than puddle. The chicken baked low and slow, the sauce thickening around it, infusing every bite with softness and flavor. Toward the end, a scattering of breadcrumbs or crushed buttery crackers might be sprinkled over the top for a bit of crunch, a touch of glamour on an otherwise unassuming dish. It was served over buttery egg noodles, fluffy rice, or sometimes even next to a baked potato, with a curl of margarine melting down the sides. The whole meal was the definition of quiet comfort. Chicken with sour cream and chives may not make headlines today, but once you taste it, you'll understand why it lingered for decades on dinner tables and in hearts. It's not bold, it's better. It's familiar, cozy, and just indulgent enough to feel like a little gift at the end of a long day. Dish 23. Chicken stew with dumplings. This was the kind of meal that didn't just feed you, it held you. Chicken stew with dumplings was the answer to cold nights, long days, and not quite enough of anything. Born in coal towns and clapboard kitchens, this dish didn't try to be elegant, it tried to be enough. And most nights, that was everything. Stew and dumplings weren't fancy words back then. They were real food, thrifty, filling, designed to make a little chicken stretch across a family like a warm blanket. No waste, no garnish, just nourishment, ladled out of a big pot that sat on the back burner for hours. It started with a whole chicken, or whatever pieces you had, simmered low with onions, celery, and carrot until the broth was deep and golden. The meat pulled apart with a spoon, soft and slow, and the bones were picked clean with care. That broth was gold. You didn't dare throw it out. Flour and butter made a quick roux to thicken things up. Not too heavy, just enough to coat the vegetables and make everything cling to the spoon. Some folks added a splash of milk, others didn't. Parsley was the go-to herb, fresh if you had it, dried if you didn't. It brought just the right brightness. Then came the dumplings. Simple. Flour, baking powder, salt, a little fat, shortening, butter, or even bacon drippings if the tin was still full. Stirred together with just enough milk to make a soft dough. Rolled into rough spoonfuls and dropped directly into the bubbling stew, where they puffed and steamed and soaked up the flavor like little edible clouds. You didn't peek too soon. You let the dumplings cook, lid on, no fuss. When they were ready, the top of the pot looked like a patch of snowy hills over a bubbling river of chicken and vegetables. This was a meal you served in big bowls with nothing on the side, because you didn't need anything on the side. It was a meal that stuck to your ribs, but more importantly, it stuck with you. And in a world that keeps moving faster, this stew reminds us to slow down, stir gently, and serve with love. Dish number 24. Chicken with 40 cloves of garlic. It sounds like a dare. 40 cloves? Most folks picture that much garlic and expect something fiery or overpowering. But chicken with 40 cloves of garlic is anything but harsh. It's soft, gentle, a dish that takes garlic, something usually loud, and teaches it how to whisper. It came to American tables in the 1980s, when French farmhouse cooking started flirting with suburban cookbooks. And though it felt exotic, it really wasn't. This was peasant food in pearls, a way for frugal cooks to make humble ingredients taste like luxury. You start with a chicken, cut into pieces, bone in, skin on. Seasoned, simply, seared golden in olive oil until the skin crisps and sighs. Then out it goes, just for a minute, while the garlic takes center stage. Yes, all 40 cloves. Peeled if you've got the patience, unpeeled if you're in a rush. Dropped into the hot oil until they sizzle and start to soften, caramelizing around the edges, their sharpness melting into something warm and almost sweet. A scent rises that's less pungent and more buttery, like roasted nuts in old stone kitchens. The chicken returns to the pot, nestled among the cloves. Then in goes a splash of dry white wine or a little chicken stock, fresh thyme, and maybe a bay leaf. Lid on, heat down. It braises slow and steady until the meat is fall-apart tender and the garlic has collapsed into itself. Spoonable, spreadable, and mellow as cream. Some folks serve it with crusty bread to mop up the golden sauce. Others ladle it over mashed potatoes or rice. But no matter how it hits the table, it stops conversation. Not because it's fancy, but because it tastes like nothing else. Rich, comforting, and just surprising enough to feel like a secret worth keeping. And the best part? It teaches you that garlic doesn't have to be loud to be the life of the party. So next time someone says 40 cloves is too much, make this and watch them go back for thirds. Dish number 25, molasses glazed chicken. There was a time when molasses wasn't just for cookies or baked beans. It was the sweet backbone of Southern cooking, poured from heavy glass jugs and stirred into just about everything. And when it hit chicken, especially over a fire or tucked in the oven until bubbling, you got molasses glazed chicken, a sticky, smoky marvel that's all but vanished from modern menus. This dish wasn't fancy, but it had a depth you could get lost in. Sweet, yes, but not sugary, earthy, savory, almost bitter at the edges, like burnt sugar flirting with pepper and smoke. It came from pit-side cooking and back porch kitchens, where recipes weren't written down. They were remembered in handfuls, pinches, and taste tests. The glaze was the soul of it. Just molasses, blackstrap if you liked things dark and bold, mixed with apple cider vinegar, yellow mustard, and a spoonful of bacon grease or butter to smooth it all out. Some added garlic powder, some stirred in a pinch of red pepper flakes or dry mustard for heat. It simmered low until it thickened, bubbling like tar but smelling like heaven. Chicken pieces, usually thighs, wings, or legs, were seasoned simply and browned, then brushed with the glaze and baked or grilled slow. Not high heat. You wanted time. Time for the molasses to caramelize, the vinegar to cut through the fat, the glaze to sink into every crag and crisped edge. The result? Chicken with a lacquered coat, sticky enough to leave fingerprints on your glass, rich enough to make napkins a necessity. Served with collard greens, skillet cornbread, or maybe just a sliced tomato and a smile, it was a meal that felt both backyard and sacred. Molasses glazed chicken has mostly disappeared, quietly nudged out by bottled barbecue and store-bought marinades, but once you taste it again, really taste it, cooked slow and served hot, you'll remember why molasses used to be a pantry staple and not just something for gingerbread men. It's a sweet goodbye to our list, but the kind that lingers long after the last bite. We've come to the end of the road, but the kitchen's still warm. 25 chicken recipes, some creamy, some crusty, some wrapped in dumplings, others in memory. They weren't flashy, they weren't trendy, but they were real. They were made with care, patience, and an understanding that good food doesn't need to be expensive, it just needs to be honest. From molasses glazes to molded noodle rings, from paprika-laced stews to casseroles crowned in cracker crumbs, each dish told a story. Of grandmothers with flour on their hands, of church suppers in the fall, of big pots that fed small paychecks, of cookbooks with cracked spines and penciled notes in the margins. These recipes may have faded from the pages of modern cooking, but they haven't disappeared. Not really. They're still there, tucked in dusty recipe tins, waiting behind cupboard doors, sleeping in the smell of sautéed onions and the clink of a wooden spoon on enamel. So, if one of these dishes brought back a memory, make it. If one made you curious, try it. You don't need perfect ingredients or a perfect kitchen. Just a little time, a little heart, and a lot of respect for the cooks who came before us. Because cooking like this isn't just about food. It's about keeping something alive. And if your family had a forgotten chicken dish of its own, a gravy, a bake, a boil, we want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments, pass it along. Add another chair to the table. There's always room for one more. Until next time, keep the skillet hot and the stories simmering.